When we are born, we crawl out of a dark tunnel and leap into the light. But what if this birth is a leap into a dark, suffocating, sooty tunnel again? In Mary Poppins, we hear a chimney sweeper describing his life on the rooftops of London. The harsh conditions of child labour caught attention long back in the 18th century, when two romantic preoccupations, childhood and industrial revolution, were put side by side in a bleak mode to target the established church and uncaring parents. Today we will catch the romantic in action in William Blake's contrary perspectives to parallel masterpieces on. Although usually in my videos, I always begin with a short biography of the poet and the context in which a poem is written. In case of this pair of poems, since we have already covered William Blake in great detail in my previous videos, I would strongly advise you to go and have a look, because there I have talked about the most important aspects of William Blake. Why is he, according to me, the first of the romantics? What new things he brought in? And there we had discussed in details about his idea of contrariety. But to give you a gist of the matter, I can tell you this, that William Blake had this idea that this entire reality was a set of contraries put together. Without contraries, no progression. That was his idea. And in 1789, he came up with a book. It was not the usual printed book that he came up with. He engraved this book, and he was also a great artist, because he etched out those drawings too on those plates. He came up with this book called The Songs of Innocence, and here he primarily deals with the life of children and the innocent way of looking at things, where human soul is not corrupted by what he later calls experience. A few years later, Songs of Experience comes out, and there he shows how this innocence is corrupted, is challenged by, and is somehow modified to a great extent by experience. So it's not just a contrary state of good or evil. He doesn't call innocence good and experience evil. He rather says that these two are complementary aspects of existence. And he also talks about symmetry, especially in his poem on the tiger. Now, since these two books, Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience, they are considered to be parallel books, because he clearly published them together again, saying that these are the contrary states of the human soul. We do find parallel poems in them, like often even with the same title or very similar title. Today's video is going to talk about one specific pair of poems with the same title but completely different perspectives. So first we will take up The Chimney Sweeper from the Songs of Innocence, and then we will take up The Chimney Sweeper from the Songs of Experience. So if you have any one of them in your syllabus, it is very, very strongly recommended that you study both these poems, because they kind of provide a wholesome perspective when it comes to this one area. So you can say Chimney Sweeper poems are on the same topic, but they offer different perspectives. When we come to the first poem, that is Chimney Sweeper from the Songs of Innocence, we notice that the speaker is a child, which is normally the case with most of the poems in Songs of Innocence, because it's like innocent person is singing something. So this has a song-like quality to it. And let's see what this child is telling us. When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me, while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, 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 weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. Hold on a second. If you have read the poem The Lamb, you have this idea that Songs of Innocence is about these happy valleys where everybody is free and happy and there is no fear. But this poem, which belongs to the Songs of Innocence, begins with description of a very bleak situation. This child's mother is dead and this child is sold by his father to someone and he works as a child labor. So why does Blake put this in Songs of Innocence at all? Because this is a very dark theme. It seems too dark for Songs of Innocence, or the flavor we find in Songs of Innocence. Perhaps because Blake wants to show us that external situation doesn't matter. What matters is how you look at the situation. He's talking about the perspective, the point of view. So we will look at the situation in which the child is, which is a very bleak one. And we will also see how the child reacts to it. That reaction shows innocence. The situation is not innocent. Now let's break this up again. When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, 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 weep. So this child was sold at a very young age. And then he says, so your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. Notice the pronoun your. This child is speaking to us, readers. And therefore, somehow, he is saying that he sweeps our chimneys, and that makes us somehow involved in this torture that he is facing. So we cannot avoid the responsibility as a society. Okay? There's little Tom Dacre. Now this child talks about a friend who is also a chimney sweep. There's little Tom Dacre who cried when his head that curled like a lamb's back was shaved. So I said, hush Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. So Tom Dacre, who comes here as a chimney sweep, is first taken and his head is shaved off. Why? Because when a chimney sweep enters the chimney, then if he has a lot of hair, then that will be a problem. What is interesting is he mentions the word lamb's back. So Tom's hair was curly, and whenever this word lamb is used in any of the poems by Blake, we cannot overlook it. It has very strong resonances. Lamb is associated with Christ, and therefore Tom's hair, it connects him to the grace of Christ in a way. So when his head is shaved off, he loses that connection. And at the same time, I feel that you might also say we are reminded of Samson Agonistus, who was very powerful, but his power lied in his hair. So his wife knew that, and his wife belonged to the opposite tribes, and she wanted to defeat him, and therefore she cut off his head while he was sleeping, and that led to his defeat. So that was Samson's story. Anyway, here the shaving off of Tom Dacre's hair, it represents a kind of loss, of course, and not just loss of an object of beauty, but it is loss of some kind of power, the power of innocence. So it's like he was being initiated into adulthood before he was ready. And he wanted to comfort Tom, saying, hush Tom, never mind it. And he's trying to show him that because of his shaved head, his hair cannot get spoiled. Okay, his hair doesn't exist anymore. So the way he is consoling Tom shows the childlike innocence of the speaker. So this is why this poem is in this book. Next comes a very disturbing thing to me. And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was sleeping, he had such a sight. So Tom had a dream that night. What was that dream about? The thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. Now, usually children are afraid of darkness and they usually don't like things which are black, normally. So imagine the life of a chimney sweep who goes down the chimney every day to clean that dark soot and in the process gets completely darkened by the carbon deposits. For him, life is like a dark coffin. And Tom dreams that all of them are locked up in coffin. So while usually coffins enclose dead people, here coffins are enclosing the living children because their lives are like black death. And by came an angel who had a bright key, notice the word bright here, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing, they run and wash in a river and shine in the sun. So this angel came, unlocked them, and they were all free. And what were these children doing? They were doing what children usually do. They were running, leaping, laughing, and they were washing themselves, a rare privilege because they do not have much opportunity to clean themselves when they are chimney sweeping. So this sight, which begins with coffins, ends with something very bright. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. These children are not wearing any clothes. Clothes represent social conventions because you see, we wear clothes to make ourselves presentable in society. And depending on your social status, you dress yourselves, right? When these children are running naked, then they are free from social oppressions, social expectations, and they are happy. All their bags left behind, bags, burdens of life, because these children are employed as unpaid laborers and they have to carry these heavy loads. The moment they get these bags down, they feel free. And that moment comes only in dreams, not in reality. And the angel told Tom, if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. So you see a pastoral scene, an idyllic nature, the kind of nature which we find in the poems like The Lamb or Introduction to the Songs of Innocence. The angel comes, speaks to the children and speaks to Tom and says that if you are a good boy, then God will be there for you and you will not need anything else. This line may be seen in two ways, First is his father had sold him and he is, you can say, in a way fatherless. God will become his father and he will be very happy. He will not require anything else to be joyful. Second and more sinister meaning is God will become your father and you will not want joy. Now they want joy. Now they feel that they are suffering and they need something else to be happy. If you are obedient and good, then you will not want to be happy. And so Tom awoke and we rose in the dark. Rose in the dark. Again, something is not right here, right? We rise with the dawn, but they are rising with the dark. And got with our bags and our brushes to work. So the burden is again put on their shoulders. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. So if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. Harm will come, but they will not be afraid because they are doing their duty. This poem is about obedience. Innocence is about obedience. If you think about the story of Adam and Eve, they were good when they were obedient. When they transgressed, They experienced that fruit of knowledge and they became disobedient. So obedience will make you have an inexperienced life, a servile life, whereas experience will expand your perspective. So what is Blake actually doing here? Is he praising innocence? I would rather say he's questioning innocence. Songs of Innocence is not just about celebrating innocence, it's also about understanding innocence. Why are we innocent and what do we do when we are innocent? Sometimes we are simply obedient and servile. We do not ask questions. We do not want things which are not given to us. So although this poem belongs to the Songs of Innocence book, it creates disturbing questions in a very subtle way. It doesn't romanticize the life of the chimney sweeper, and it shows the exploitation that a child has to bear. Now, many of you are not familiar with the exact work that a chimney sweeper did back then. So before we go on to the Songs of Experience, let me just give you a brief idea about the exact job description of a chimney sweep. They are called both chimney sweeper and chimney sweep. Both are correct. Now back in the early days, they didn't have auto clean chimneys. So in London or in major cities, the houses had these long chimneys which had to be cleaned regularly. Then regulations came regarding the number of chimneys that a house can have, and limitations started to be imposed, especially after the Great Fire of London. And then some intricate architectural connectors were made so that they ended up having less number of chimney spouts but more rooms to which those spouts reached. They were like those plumbing tunnels. Now when somebody burnt wood in a chimney, then of course carbon deposits piled up in those tunnels. Now the authorities said that you need to keep them clean to avoid any fire hazard. But now that these chimneys were delicately connected with each other, and sometimes these tunnels were very, very narrow, too narrow for a grown-up man to enter and clean that physically, so they started to employ children. Children, sometimes as young as 4 years old. And parents, they lied about the age of their children so that they could sell them as apprentices. They used to call them apprentices, like interns. And while doing that job, these children, their bodies did not mature in a normal way. They had deformities. They often suffered from inflammation in the eyes, and worse than anything else, cancer. Nobody bothered much about it because they thought that, well, we have no alternative. We need to light our fires and we need to clean our chimneys. So children were continuously robbed of their childhood, and no regulations were there to stop this until much later. When Blake was writing this, there were no regulations at all. In Songs of Experience version, you get a more blatant account. A little black thing in the snow, crying, "Weep, weep," in notes of woe. Who is speaking? Not a child. Some observer who looks at a child's body in the snow and can hear the sound that the child is making, the weep, weep sound. And he calls him a little black thing. Now, in the first poem, where we have seen that the child was sold by the father, we have already seen the dehumanization of the child. And that is reinforced here in this expression, little black thing. So, this child has become an object. "Where are thy father and mother? Say." "They are both gone up to the church to pray." So this man presumably a man, goes to this child and asks about his parents. In the first poem, the mother was dead. And somehow we feel that mothers are more caring, and okay, since the mother was dead, it was natural for the father to sell the child because fathers love their children less than mothers. This is the usual idea of people. Here, both the parents are alive and they have gone to the church to pray, leaving this child in the snow. So usually the presence of the father and especially the mother is a protective presence. But even when they are alive, they have abandoned the child. Because I was happy upon the heath and smiled among the winter's snow, they clothed me in the clothes of death and taught me to sing the notes of woe. That clothed imagery we had in case of Songs of Innocence, Chimney Sweeper, that they were naked, which means that getting rid of the clothes means getting rid of social obligations, social conditions. Here, he is saying that he is clothed in the clothes of death. So his parents have only introduced him to death, not life. And they have taught him to sing the notes of suffering, notes of woe. So what is the duty of a parent? To provide protection, to support a child, to clothe him for warmth. But here they are clothing him to work almost in a coffin, because a tunnel of the chimney is like a coffin. And because I am happy and dance and sing. So he was happy and then his parents decided to make him unhappy. And now even then he is trying to show a happy face, because that's what children do. They can't continue to be melancholic. So even when they are chimney sweeping, if you have 3, 4, 5 children working together, maybe at the end of their work day, they play together and they laugh. And seeing that, the parents think that, okay, these kids are fine. So he says, and because I am happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who make up a heaven of our misery. So God here is not the universal God, our Father in heaven. God belongs to a certain class of people. And the priests and the church, they belong to this specific God who has no benevolence at all, who gives no guidance, who gives no grace. And they are forming a very sinful trinity. You know what a trinity is in Christian belief system? They have this idea of Father, that is the real God, the Son, who was born as Jesus Christ, and Holy Ghost, something like a spirit. And they form this Holy Trinity. Here we have a different kind of Trinity: God, priest, king. And we don't know about God, but so far as priest and king is concerned, they were ruthlessly oppressive to people. So if they belong to God, then of course this God, this version of God is again ruthlessly oppressive, because this God doesn't do anything to alleviate the sorrow, the misery of these children. So how is this poem different from the first poem? First is you have no friends here. This child appears to be much isolated. Although he dances and sings, we know that it's a pretense. Whereas in the first poem, we see this child comforting Tom Dacre, and there's a friendship which they share. That's why Tom shares his vision with him, and somehow they console each other. So they manage to go on. But here, this child knows the reality. And sometimes with knowledge comes no happiness. Rather, I would say with knowledge, happiness can hardly come. In this poem, there is no hope for salvation. There is no hope for redemption. In the first poem, there is hope that there will be an angel who would come, and this angel would say that if you are good, God will be there for you. We have naked children enjoying themselves in the first poem, although in a dream, but still there is a way to escape. Here, no escape is there anymore because the experience is too much. Somehow, when I see this expression, a heaven of our misery, I'm reminded of this poem Jerusalem, where Blake talks about dark satanic mills, which are these orthodox churches of England. And he says, and was Jerusalem builded here among these dark satanic mills? So he is calling churches mills of Satan, because these churches provide no light but darkness. While talking about William Blake earlier, in the other video I was referring to, I mentioned his work Marriage of Heaven and Hell, and there is this first part called The Argument, where we have this person called Rinthra in a barren landscape, a heath. In that part, Blake attempts to show that what we commonly see as good is basically obedience, as I was telling you earlier. And he writes, good is the passive that obeys reason, evil is the active springing from energy. Good is heaven, evil is hell. So he does not make a value judgment here. He rather tries to understand what are the things that make society call somebody good. When society sees that a person conforms to its codes, then the person is branded as a good person. But how does that change the whole suffering of these chimney sweepers? It does not. These children are subjected to a kind of physical as well as spiritual slavery. In the first poem, the child still has some kind of a faith in the religious system, the system where God comes and saves everybody. But in the second poem, we see that this child knows that it's all fake, or rather, organized religion is the form of oppression. God is something that is used by people to oppress other people. But since it is William Blake, no discussion is complete without actually looking at these poems as he painted them. So in order to understand the essential difference between the two poems, I want you to look at these two plates set side by side first. The first thing you would notice is that in the first poem, you see bright colors, orange, red, a little bit of brown, while in the second, it's all monochrome, dark, and maybe a little shade of grey and blue here and there, which increases the sinister effect which this plate conveys. Now focus on the first plate. If you zoom to the bottom part, you would see there are these children who are enjoying themselves. Presumably they are not wearing anything. No burdens with them, no burdens of society, no loads, no bags. And interestingly, there is an angelic form which is kind of holding the hand of this child, probably picking him up from his coffin. And they're all very happy. So many trees which kind of become a continuous frame to the whole poem. And these children are holding each other's hands even. So we have these ideas of friendship, of enjoyment, and the color black, although it is used in this whole plate, it doesn't become the predominant shade. Because to an innocent child, the reality is not what makes him go on. His dreams makes him go on. His dreams make him go on, and his dreams are bright colored. Now come to the next one, that is the Songs of Experience, the Chimney Sweeper. There is no full-grown tree here, unlike the first plate. You just have a few withered leaf-like things. And when you zoom in on the child, you would notice that there is some dark, cloudy structure at which he is looking. He's carrying burden, the sack, and it's probably snowing because you have these streaks of black passing down. What really saddens me in this picture is the series of footprints you can notice around his feet, which shows that other children have walked this way. But unlike the first plate, they are not walking with him. So in suffering, there is no companionship. You suffer alone. So this sense of loneliness, when he's looking up at the sky, he sees nothing there. No promise of better days. There is a house in the background with one window, which is also very dark, and his walk is slouched and his body doesn't show a lot of enthusiasm when he's walking. He's looking kind of back and up, and there is despair. A long look at these plates often make us understand things which are not there in these words. And I'm sure I missed a lot of things which, if you look at these plates, you might identify. So I am really very eager to know what you feel about these pictures and what new things come to your mind. It would be a great thing to discuss in comment section. So when we talk about Blake, people use expressions like he's a romantic visionary. You have read these two poems now. Do you really think he's a visionary? Visionary is somebody who is more of an idealist, who is not in touch with exact immediate reality. But we see him talking actually about reality here, hard reality. And romanticism was essentially, at least in the beginning, about two things. One is the whole idea of childhood and the loss of natural world as an effect of industrial revolution. And sadly, when Britain was becoming an industrial powerhouse, the world leader, it was doing it at the cost of its own children, because child labor was cheap, unregulated, easily available. In 1817, a parliamentary committee was formed, and they investigated the conditions of these chimney sweeps, and they came up with these basic findings. One is employers preferred smaller children because they could climb into those intricate structures. Girls as well as boys were used. If they refused, they were punished physically. Most of the time, they were sold by their own parents, and these parents, as I told you, often lied about the age of the children to make them sellable. And I don't even have the numbers to share with you as to how many children were killed because of cancer. Charles Lamb, in his essay, The Praise of Chimney Sweepers, he talks about these children and says, I have a kindly yearning towards these dim specks, poor blots, innocent blacknesses. Although I find his words a bit disturbing, but at least people were talking. And somehow social consciousness grows out of these apparently romantic, idealistic writings. We often feel that what's the point, writing about corruption, writing about evils of society. But I think that people will start giving some kind of attention to any social condition, to any social oppression, only when they repeatedly see people writing about them. And not just writings. You have representations through one of the most popular mediums, the cinema. In Mary Poppins, we have this chimney sweep. Although he's not a child, but he has been through this whole experience. So we see him dancing around with two children, and they enter this house, and there's a chimney. The girl child, looks up and she feels very scared and said it's gloomy and dark there. He says it's doorway to a place of enchantment. So what, is he glamorizing this whole profession, he is not. He's trying to portray that when you have nothing to fall back on, it's only your imagination that can save you. But that is not the case with the child who speaks in the book, The Songs of Experience. The practice was not abolished until 1875, nearly 50 years after Blake's death. So in a nutshell, we can say that these two poems are about the same social oppression that children face. The difference is only in the perspective that the speaking child has. While the first one offers a kind of solace, the second one proves that that solace was a falsehood and thereby refutes the first poem altogether. The other places where Blake writes about chimney sweepers are poems like London. There also he paints a pretty bleak picture. Whenever little children are subjects of his poems in Songs of Experience, we see a lot of questioning on the duty of parents. And somehow God, since God is considered to be the ultimate parent figure, God is also problematized in the process. The black color which gets on the skin of these boys is seen as evil, not because black skin is evil. He writes in this poem Little Black Boy, and he shows that black skin is a celebration of the land of the sun. This blackness is artificial, imposed by man, by society, and this blackness is evil. So while the Songs of Innocence yearns for washing off this blackness, yearns for a naked flight into this land of fantasy, Songs of Experience shows that the sky above is darker than your skin. There's no point flying up there, especially when you need to clean the chimneys of the churches too. How can you say the God who belongs to the church is going to be a savior now? Alright, so I'll see you again in my next video, maybe in a less gloomy way. Literature is not always about entertainment. It's also, or rather it is more about introspection. Thank you all for being with me. See you all again in my next video. Till then, this is Monami Mukherjee signing off. Bye-bye. Up where the smoke is all pillared and cold, twin pavement and stars is the chimney sweep world.